Scary True High School Reunion Horror Stories, Part 1, The Ride with Zach. I hadn't planned on going to my 10-year high school reunion. Honestly, I would have been fine pretending those years didn't exist. But Kayla was persistent. She messaged me every other day for a month, begging me to come. You need to be there, one night, it'll be like therapy, plus we're pre-gaming. Eventually, I gave in. Maybe I was tired of being the odd one out, or maybe I just didn't want to be alone that Saturday night. Either way, I found myself standing in front of my mirror, smoothing out a dress I hadn't worn in years, wondering if this was a mistake. Kayla's house looked just like it did when we were teenagers. Her mom still kept flower pots on the porch, and the same porch light flickered faintly as I climbed the steps. Marissa and Sophia were already inside, drinks in hand, music playing from a Bluetooth speaker. We caught up, we laughed, we pretended like 10 years hadn't passed in a blink. By the time the Uber pulled up, we were already tipsy. The reunion was being held at some catering hall on the edge of town. I had driven past it before, but never actually gone in. When I arrived, I was surprised by how many cars were already parked out front. The place was packed. Inside, lights flashed across the ceiling, music blasted from the speakers, and people filled the room. Older, more tired versions of people I used to see every day. Some I recognized immediately. Others looked like strangers. It was overwhelming. I stuck close to my friends at first, but they slowly drifted into other conversations, with old flames, teammates, or people I barely remembered. I found myself sitting at a table with a group of girls I vaguely recognized, listening to them talk about babies, engagement rings, and mortgages, while I quietly sipped my drink. That's when I noticed someone watching me. He was sitting alone across the room, half in shadow. Older than the others, maybe, or just more confident. When our eyes met, I looked away quickly, pretending I hadn't noticed. But something about his stare lingered in my mind. A few minutes later, he was walking toward me. He slid into the seat beside me, like we were old friends. "Hey," he said smoothly. "Saw you sitting here alone. Mind if I join?" His name was Zach. He said he transferred to our school's senior year, which would explain why I didn't recognize him. That made some sense. Our school was big enough that people could go unnoticed, especially if they weren't involved in sports or drama. He was charming, confident without being arrogant, attentive but not pushy. We talked about the usual things: work, high school memories, random people we barely remembered. He asked if I wanted a drink, but I declined. I'd had enough, and something about him made me want to stay sharp. Eventually, he asked for my number. I gave it to him. I don't know why. Maybe I was flattered, maybe I was bored, or maybe I just didn't want to sit alone again. He thanked me, smiled, and went back to his table. I sat there for a few more minutes, then got up to look for my friends. They were scattered across the room, laughing with people I didn't care to talk to. Then I got a text. It was Zach. "You look kind of done with this place. Want to ride home?" I looked around. I didn't feel like waiting for an Uber alone, and my friends were all too drunk to leave. Against my better judgment, I said yes. He replied, "Meet me in the lobby." I didn't tell anyone. I just grabbed my coat and left. Zach was waiting by the door, keys in hand. His car was a sleek black coupe. New, clean, a little too polished. The second I sat inside, I felt a small knot form in my stomach. He asked for my address, handed me his phone, and I typed it in. "Long night?" he asked as we pulled away. "Yeah," I said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. From the back seat, he grabbed 2 bottles of wire and handed one to me. "Trust me, you'll thank me tomorrow," he said. I took it, twisted the cap. It was already broken. I took a small sip anyway, just enough to be polite. We drove in silence for a few minutes. Then my phone buzzed. Kayla was calling. I ignored it. Then Marissa, then Sophia, one after the other. In the group chat, messages came flooding in. Where are you? Are you okay? Who are you with? Check the Facebook group now. I opened Facebook, heart starting to race. There was a new post in the reunion group. It had been made just a few minutes ago. Warning, there's a guy here that no one seems to recognize. He's been introducing himself with different names. Didn't go to our school. Be careful. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Zach glanced over. Everything okay? I forced a smile. Yeah, just drunk texts from my friends. I texted the group. I'm with a guy named Zach. He offered me a ride. Kayla replied in all caps. That's him. Get out now. My throat tightened. We stopped at a red light. I unbuckled my seatbelt and yanked the door open. I'm sorry, I need to go, I said, already halfway out of the car. He yelled after me, but I didn't listen. I just ran. I ran across the street and into the parking lot of a closed restaurant. I crouched behind a dumpster, heart racing. He didn't follow. I called Kayla, voice shaking. We're on our way, she said. Just stay hidden. They arrived 20 minutes later. I climbed into the back seat, shaking. No one said anything for a long time. That night, I stayed at Kayla's place. None of us really slept. The next morning, I went home, hoping to pretend like it had all been a nightmare. But there was a knock at my door. I froze. I peered out the window. It wasn't him. It was my neighbor, Mr. Delaney. He looked concerned. Did you have someone over last night? He asked. No, I said slowly. Why? Well, some guy was here around 3 in the morning. He was looking in your windows. My blood turned cold. He continued. I asked what he was doing. He said he was looking for someone named Miranda. I told him he had the wrong apartment and he left. I thanked him, heart pounding. That day, I broke my lease and moved into a smaller unit on the second floor of another building. It didn't matter how inconvenient it was. I had to feel safe. For a while, things were quiet. Until I found the envelope. It was slipped under my door. No name, no return address. Inside was a photo. It was me, sitting at my kitchen table. The picture had been taken from outside through the window. My heart dropped. I reported it to the police, but they said the same thing. No return address, no real evidence. I bought pepper spray, installed a camera above my door, slept with the lights on. Weeks passed. Then one night, I heard a knock at my window. It was 3 in the morning. I lived on the second floor. The knock came again. I sat up in bed, frozen. Then I heard footsteps on my porch. Slow, deliberate. I crept to the window, and there he was. Zach. He stood in the shadows, staring up at my apartment. He raised his hand and knocked again. I called the police, whispering into the phone. When they arrived, he was gone. The only proof I had was the recording from my door camera, a blurry image of a man in a hoodie staring up. They said they'd open an investigation, but without a full name, a license plate, or a clear face, there wasn't much they could do. I still live in that second floor apartment. The locks have been changed, the curtains stay closed, the pepper spray is by my bed. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear knocking. And sometimes I wonder if Zach ever really left.
Part 2. Tyler's Eyes. 5 years after high school, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. I'd moved out of my parents' house, found a stable job, and for the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I hadn't thought about him in so long. About Tyler. About how bad it got. When I got the invite to my 5-year high school reunion, I was hesitant. My graduating class was small, barely 200 of us. Most people were friendly, a few I missed, but some Some I prayed I'd never see again. My best friend Julia convinced me to go. "You'll regret it if you don't," she said. "Just come for an hour, I'll be right there with you." She was the only person who knew everything. About the threats, the messages, the night he showed up at my house throwing rocks at my window like a psychotic Romeo. About the time my dad chased him off the property in his slippers. Tyler had been obsessed with me senior year. What started as a harmless crush turned into daily texts, jealous outbursts, and eventually, threats. When I cut him off, he snapped. He told me he knew where I lived. He knew my parents' work schedule. He said he'd come by whether I wanted him to or not. I reported it, but nothing ever happened. The texts eventually stopped. He faded into the background like a bad dream. Or so I thought. The night of the reunion, Julia picked me up and we drove to the banquet hall on the east side of town. It was decorated simply, with gold streamers, name tags on the table, and the same playlist from prom blaring through old speakers. I recognized most of the faces. It was weird, comforting even, to see so many people frozen in time. I started to relax, until I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and there he was. Tyler. My breath caught in my throat. He looked the same. Older, sure, but the eyes. Those were the same. Dark, unblinking, hungry. "Hey," he said. "Can we talk?" My voice caught. I muttered something like, "Hope you're doing well, but I'm not really looking to catch up," and turned away. His hand landed on my shoulder. Firm. Too firm. "You're already gonna be like that?" he said. I stepped back and shook him off. "Let go of me." His jaw clenched. He looked around like he knew this wasn't the place for a scene. Then without a word, he walked away. The mood was shattered. I told Julia what happened and she immediately tensed. "We should leave," she said. But I didn't want to give him the satisfaction, so we stayed, drifting between conversations, pretending everything was fine. But my eyes scanned the room constantly. I didn't see Tyler again for the rest of the night. Julia said he must have left. I wanted to believe that. After the reunion, Julia dropped me off at my place. I waved goodbye, unlocked my front door, and stepped inside. I turned off the porch light and locked the door behind me. Then I saw a shadow move across my front window. A car. A black Jeep Cherokee. It slowly rolled past the house, then stopped 3 houses down. I waited, watched. After a minute, it drove away. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I decided to look up Tyler's Instagram. It was set to private. I had a burner account I used for stuff like this. I sent a follow request. He accepted. No pictures of a Jeep, no new posts at all, just his face, that same unnerving grin from high school, staring straight at the camera. Later that afternoon, I got a DM from him. It was long, pages and pages of manipulative nonsense about how he'd never stopped thinking about me, how the universe brought us back together, how we were meant to finish what we started. I didn't reply. I blocked him. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. That night, I was jolted awake by the sound of my doorbell. It was 1 a.m. I stayed in bed holding my breath. The bell rang again, then again, then it turned to knocking. Heavy, aggressive. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I called Julia's dad. He knew someone on the local police force. A detective came by that afternoon. I showed him everything. The old texts, the Instagram message. I told him about the Jeep, the reunion, all of it. He took notes, asked questions, promised to make a call. He reached out to Tyler, gave him a formal, verbal warning. No contact, or it becomes criminal harassment. So far, it worked. But I still sleep with the lights on. And sometimes when I'm walking to my car at night, I catch myself looking over my shoulder. Because even now, I can still feel Tyler's eyes.
Part 3. The woman named Claire. We'd only been seeing each other for a few weeks. Her name was Phoebe, or at least, that's what she told me. We matched on a dating app. She was 4 years older than me, quiet, elegant, and oddly reserved. We went out twice. The first time we grabbed drinks. The second time, I brought her out with some of my friends. They didn't say much, just smiled politely. Later, they admitted something about her didn't sit right. She didn't talk much. When she did, it was short and vague, like every answer had been rehearsed. Still, she seemed nice enough. When she invited me to her high school reunion, I agreed. She said she didn't want to go alone, and after dragging her out with my friends, I figured it was fair. The reunion wasn't at a bar or banquet hall. She told me it was at a former classmate's house. A rich guy who apparently offered to host. It sounded unusual, but not impossible. The house was a massive colonial mansion nestled behind iron gates down a long gravel driveway. Trees lined the property, and even before we stepped out of the car, I had a weird feeling in my chest. We entered the house and it was off, silent, cold. People stood in clusters, whispering quietly, barely smiling. They didn't seem like 28-year-olds. In fact, most of them looked much older. As soon as we walked in, every head in the room turned toward me. Phoebe was greeted by a few people, but when their eyes met mine, their smiles dropped. There was no music, no laughter, no drinks in hand, just stares. I leaned in and whispered, "Are you sure this is your reunion?" She smiled, too quickly. "Yeah, totally, class of 2014. But these people looked like they graduated in the 90s. Something didn't feel right. They asked me weird questions, where I lived, who I lived with, what I did for work. Not friendly questions, more like scouting questions. I excused myself and walked down the hallway. I didn't really have to use the bathroom, I just needed space. I locked the door behind me and sat on the toilet lid, scrolling through my texts. I messaged my friends. "This reunion is so weird. Everyone's like 40. I want to leave." One of them replied, "LOL, she invited you to a cult?" Another, "Dude, get out now." Phoebe texted me, "Where'd you go?" I replied, "Bathroom. This party's super weird. You want to leave soon?" There was a knock on the door. When I opened it, a guy was waiting outside, probably the youngest person there. He leaned in, speaking in a low whisper. "You need to leave. She's not who she says she is." I blinked. "Phoebe?" He nodded. "Whatever she told you her name was, it's not her real name. This isn't a high school reunion." My mouth dried. He said, "She brought others here before, guys. You won't find them now." I tried to ask more, but he shook his head, stepped into the bathroom, and shut the door behind him. I didn't wait. I walked calmly through the hallway and slipped out the front door, back into the night. I got in my car and drove. Phoebe, or whoever she really was, texted me, "Where did you go?"
I didn't answer. When I got home, I searched her number on White Pages. The name didn't match Phoebe. It was Claire Foster. Even creepier, the address I picked her up from both times wasn't hers. The real Claire Foster lived 3 towns over. Both times we met, she was already standing on the sidewalk. She'd never once let me see where she actually lived. I blocked her number and tried to forget it. My friends teased me. Bro, you nearly got sacrificed at a suburban coven. Another, next time, maybe pick a girl with social media. It was funny, until it wasn't. Because the next week, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo of me, sleeping. The angle was from outside my bedroom window. I lived on the 2nd floor.